Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about Normal People by Sally Rooney, which was recently longlisted for this year's Man Booker Prize and has been heralded with near universal praise since its release. And this is Sally Rooney's very quick follow-up to her novel Conversations with Friends, which was published just last year. And at the tender age of about 27 and writing about young, highly educated Irish millennials, Sally Rooney is already being trumpeted as the voice of her generation. And while I feel like we've heard this kind of overblown praise before, and while I think that critics maybe need to go out and meet some other kinds of millennials, I really did love this book. I tore through it, and that's as someone who was pretty underwhelmed by Conversations with Friends. Like that book, Normal People is concerned with the ironic and intellectual posturing of young, well-educated university students in Dublin, and in this book Sally Rooney continues to explore the performative aspects of social relationships, and particularly of sexual and romantic entanglements. And this novel has all the pitch-perfect dialogue and clever social commentary that was in Conversations with Friends, but I thought that it plumbed deeper into the personal turmoil and psychology beneath all of those social performances. It's also more focused and controlled from a narrative standpoint, and it has a clarity of language that makes it extremely readable. So there's a lot that's commendable in this novel, but I will say the primary reason I liked it so much is that in its basic framework, it's pretty much a super eloquent, well-observed romance novel. Now, plenty of reviews have called this book a love story or a literary exploration of young love, but the more I read, the more I was shocked at how closely it hews to so many of the tropes of the contemporary romance genre. And before you accuse me of slandering this brilliant, serious, voice of her generation writer with all the triteness implied by the romance genre label, allow me to lay out some of the evidence and explain why this is actually a really great thing. Because in adhering to certain conventions of the romance genre, Sally Rooney is able to deliver this intensely satisfying and, yes, at times swoon-worthy love story, but she's also able to add depth and complexity that elevates this book beyond what we typically expect of romance. So let's start with the basic premise. We have Marianne and Connell, who are two teenagers in their last year of high school in a small town in Ireland. Connell is extremely popular and a forward on the football team, and he's also secretly really smart. And then you have Marianne, who's extremely intelligent, but also extremely unpopular and basically a social pariah. Tale as old as time, guys. In addition to that, Marianne is rich, Connell is poor. Another tale as old as time. And although Marianne and Connell don't speak to each other or interact while they're at school, their paths do cross outside of class because Connell's mother is a housekeeper for Marianne's family. And of course, the two are inexplicably drawn towards each other and begin an unlikely secret relationship. So right from the get-go, you have tropes on tropes on tropes, and of course, Marianne and Connell start to develop real feelings for each other, and what follows is a series of intense ruptures and reunions over the next several years when they're both attending university together at Trinity College in Dublin. So what we have here is basically a classic will they won't they romance, complete with plenty of angst and thinly drawn romantic rivals and agonizing, at times slightly contrived miscommunication. There's also the slow revelation of a traumatic backstory, which is actually a fairly common trope in contemporary romance. There's a dramatic confrontation in which one of the leads gets to play the hero, and at one point there's even a public declaration that will make you want to melt into your couch. And like any great romance novel, this book also features plenty of heat and swoon-worthy moments. Sally Rooney is so good at dialogue and at describing the ways that people interact with each other and touch each other and look at each other. And so when she creates those scenes of intimacy and tenderness and real closeness, it feels so real and so immediate that it genuinely gives you chills, depending on how susceptible you are to that sort of thing. But while adhering to these tropes of the romance genre, Sally Rooney also adds depth and the occasional twist that allows her to explore topics and issues beyond just the central love story. For example, when Marianne and Connell leave their small town to attend university in Dublin, Marianne thrives in this new, intellectual, at times pretentious, and often very moneyed environment, while Connell feels immediately out of place. For Connell, who was always well-known and well-liked and a hometown boy of sorts, that transition is extremely disorienting, and the pressure to reinvent yourself in college is one that he finds almost debilitating. And so it's through Connell's university experience that Sally Rooney is able to examine issues of class and the often alienating nature of elite institutions. In that way, Rooney is able to invert her cool guy, uncool girl premise and explore this new dynamic between Marianne and Connell in really interesting and dramatic ways. Beyond the premise, the miscommunication and angst that Marianne and Connell experience as they collide and separate over and over again is very typical of romance novels, but beyond prolonging the narrative, these miscommunications help to illuminate Marianne and Connell's respective insecurities, their class differences, their anxieties about who they are and who they're becoming as people, and above all, their individual fears that they're not normal, especially as it pertains to love, sex, intimacy, whatever. So that will they, won't they dynamic feels very true to their characters and to the age that they're at. And it also provides insight into the shifting power dynamics in their relationship over time. And like I said earlier, this book also has all the heat and tenderness of a romance novel, often of a fairly explicit variety. But beyond just satisfying the lust of the characters and the readers, Sally Rooney uses the sex scenes in this novel to illustrate not only the intense closeness and intimacy between these characters, but also, for lack of a less cheesy term, to show the real transformative power of love. Marianne and Connell are able to be with each other in ways that they're not able to be with other people. And it has nothing to do with anything different in them individually, but it has everything to do with the specific energy and dynamic between them. Being together allows them to expand and open up and be a different, more fully realized version of themselves in a way that's really exhilarating and makes those intimate scenes feel really meaningful and critical to the story. Of course, the most important part of a romance novel is the happily ever after, so does this novel hold up on that end? Some spoilers coming up, so if you don't want to hear this part, just skip ahead. This book very much ends in medias res, in a way that echoes the beginning of the novel. Just as we didn't have an official meet cute, we also don't have a decisive happily ever after. Instead, what we get is two young people together in love, but facing a future that may take them in different directions. So in that sense, Sally Rooney is perhaps rejecting the fantasy of the romance genre and instead presenting us with something much more realistic. At the same time, she leaves you with the sense that these two people's lives are fundamentally intertwined, and that although things might not always be exactly as they are in this moment, their love for each other is real and transformative and matters, regardless of what the future holds. And that sense that Marianne and Connell's lives are woven together is echoed in the very structure of the book, which is constantly drifting backwards in time and weaving past memories and moments into the main present narrative. So although this book rejects the happily ever after fantasy, I will say this is a story that seems to believe in soulmates, and that's still pretty romantic, even with some of the open-endedness. So in conclusion, this book doesn't quite meet all the criteria of the contemporary romance novel, and it will never be classified as such. But I still think that what Sally Rooney has created here is an incredibly compelling modern love story that has all the satisfaction and the dizziness of a romance novel and then some. I will say that I thought there were elements toward the end of this novel that felt a bit rushed or underdeveloped, developed, particularly a side thread involving one of their friends from home. But besides that, I really enjoyed this book and I definitely recommend it. If you've read this book and have thoughts, let me know. And if you have any thoughts on the intersection of romance and literary fiction, please share them below as well. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!